Hi, everybody. My name is Katherine Norrie, and I'm one of the art teachers at Northfield High School. And I'm here with you today to teach you about a really cool project. It's a project that could practically go with you anywhere that you are, because it's a project that requires very few materials, and it really just requires some quiet, patient space for you to just relax and be the most careful artist that you could possibly be. And it's called a Zentangle. So the art of Zentangle is that you get lost in this idea of pattern. And as I look at the mask that I wore today to school, it almost looks like a Zentangle. There's so much beauty in this, and there's so much line variety. That's a big deal when it comes to Zentangles. It's a drawing that really depends on you spending the time to make some areas dark, some areas light, maybe some areas kind of in the middle, because all of that variety of darks and lights and medium values really engages your viewer. The people want to look at your artwork because it looks so cool, right? It's so fun to see. So a Zentangle is tiny. It's tiny so you don't get bored or feel panicked about being able to get it done. So I like to use a little piece of paper, a little piece of watercolor paper actually. And I like to have it be 4 inches by 4 inches. That's how big this is. It's only 4 inches long. And then the actual drawing is only about 3 inches by 3 inches. So the way to start a Zentangle, the way I start a Zentangle, is to put a dot with a really light pencil. Do you see how this is a 6H pencil? Do you see that? 6H. You might just want to look at your yellow pencil that you might have at home and see what it says. I bet it says HB. This pencil is a lot lighter than your yellow pencil. It's very, very light. And so it's great to buy one of these pencils at an art store. There's actually less graphite in this pencil than there is in your yellow pencil. Wow, isn't that neat? They bake clay into the graphite. They mix clay with graphite, and the pencils that are harder, so the H, we're just gonna say that stands for hard. The pencils that are harder have more clay in them. So for every stroke of your pencil, you get less graphite, you get some clay, which doesn't actually have a color. It's pretty neat. So you're gonna take your hard pencil, because we don't wanna leave a lot of pencil dust everywhere. And I'm gonna have you just place 4 dots, 1 in each corner, kind of like that. They're really little, you can barely see them. Okay. And now I'm gonna have you connect those dots, but the real kicker is you don't have to try to draw a straight line. You could draw a wavy line, you could draw kind of a flowing line. The people who invented Zentangles actually say that calm, relaxing, gentle lines are more pleasing to the eye than straight ruler lines. So maybe we have to readjust our thinking that all lines don't have to be made with rulers. I think that would work well. So I'm going to connect my lines. I'm going to do a little bit of a sway. Feels like that kind of a morning to me. Okay, so I've drawn my lines. Everybody's lines will look different, and that's great. Everybody's Zentangles will look different at the end of this. Now, the next step is fun, and it's all about your imagination. So the next step is you're going to imagine that out of the end of your pencil is a string. A string is going to come out of it. And your job is to take a string from one edge of your line all around your whole picture plane. The space inside of your box is actually called a picture plane. When you see me in the high school, you can remind me of that, and I'll say, how did you find that out? Oh, you learned it from me. So I'll demonstrate. I'm going to slowly, lightly, don't want to push very hard. Even though it's light, let's just not push very hard. I'm going to draw a meandering, traveling string that loops and twists, but I want to make sure that it touches the edges. There's something in art called composition. That's kind of a big word, but it really means how do you set up the objects in your picture to look the very best. And some of those composition rules say you should go off 3 to 4 sides. You should lock your picture onto the edges. You should overlap. You should balance your positive and negative spaces. So I've tried to do some of that just in my string composition. So we're going to imagine this is a string and it loops up and it loops down and it twirls, but it touches the edges as we go, because what I've done is I've made all these interesting spaces. These spaces are going to be really important when we start making our Zentangle patterns. So if I counted all of these different spaces that I just created, that's actually the number of different patterns that I get to draw. I get to fill all of these spaces with pattern. Oh my goodness. And the patterns will bump right up next to one another. So there won't be any gaps between them. They will be just a continuous flow of patterns. So now it's a really good idea to turn on some relaxing music. Maybe some music without words. Maybe some music that's really calming. Maybe you have headphones you want to put on, or maybe you just have a quiet stereo in your room you could turn on. But I think some quiet music is really helpful at this point. That's what I do in the classroom when I teach this in my watercolor class. We listen to calm, quiet music, and it feels like you could almost take a nap. It's so relaxing. But here's the trick. Now you put your pencil away. You're done with your pencil. You don't need this anymore. What? Now is the time to go get some permanent black pens. My favorite are the micron pens, and they come in all different sizes, from really tiny tips to pretty big tips. But you can see that this tip, it's really small. It's very small. It's not as small as they come, but it's really nice. I also love the Identi pen. The reason is I get a thick tip, kind of like a big Sharpie. But I like this black better than a Sharpie. I don't like Sharpies. They look a little purple sometimes. So this has a better black. And it also has another tip that is kind of more in between the thick and the micron. So I like to give myself a couple different pens. If you have the opportunity to go to the art store and buy more than one of these, oh, you'll be so happy. Oh, you'll be so happy. Okay, if you have access to the internet, what's really great is you can type in the word Zentangle to a search engine. And when you type that in, what you're going to find are patterns that are really cool. Cooler than I could ever doodle just out of my own mind. Because we all can doodle for a while out of our own mind, but then we kind of lose steam. We don't have great patterns that just keep coming. Oh, maybe you do. Maybe you do. I sometimes find that's hard. So I've put together this pamphlet for my classes full of different patterns, full of them. And so you could look on the internet and try to find some very cool patterns. You could also pause it on this screen and look at these patterns. You could pause it on this screen and look at those. So I filled this book with lots of different ideas so that you can doodle in new ways that you haven't doodled before. But now remember, each of these doodles is just going to go into one little space. So let's say I choose this really cool kind of box with a little top, almost like a little lid. They look like lids. What if I put that pattern just in this box? That's the only spot that I need to worry about for that pattern. Because when I go to the next box, I'm going to pick another and then another. And as you look at these patterns, you see how some are really kind of dark and bold, right? They really pop. It's nice if in your spaces you could alternate. So sometimes you're light and sometimes you're bold, and that's going to give your piece movement. The viewer's eyes and your eyes are going to move through that piece. It's going to be really fun to look at. All right. If at any point you feel stressed or rushed or impatient, or maybe you have an appointment coming up and you need to finish fast, you should just set this aside. You don't have to finish this in one sitting. You can finish it tomorrow. These are about the greatest stress reliever ever. I have a lot of my students contact me from college and say that when they felt stressed in college, they did a Zentangle. That's the greatest. So here's some examples of a finished Zentangle, because yes, we're at this point, but you might say, well, what is this going to look like in the end? Here's one that I did. It's so fun. Look at these shapes. Look at these little star shapes. I made the star shapes without making star shapes. I just drew those hatching lines in the background. Isn't that neat? Oh, I guess, and I even repeated. That's something I should say. If you find a pattern that you love, I must have really fallen in love with this one. If you find a pattern that you love, you can repeat it. And actually that brings some unity and harmony to your picture if you have things that show up multiple times. I really like that. Now, here's another. This was done by one of my students. Now, Sophia even chose to have little flowers, and she let the roots grow out of the picture, or she let little leaves come off the side, or this kind of looks like a dragon's, back coming off the top. So you could break your border. I didn't choose to break my border, but I really like the way this looks. They have a very different aesthetic. It's another big word, but it's the overall feel of what something looks like. How does it make you feel? So maybe this one feels more modern. This one maybe feels more like a fairy tale, maybe like a storybook. Now, if you want to take it one step further, if you have time, in my class, we go from the black and white to painted. And that's because we are in a watercolor class, so I'm teaching everyone how to paint. So drawing gets us to a point where we get to paint, but we use analogous color schemes. Analogous means colors that are next to one another on the color wheel. Oh, there's a color wheel back there. So this person used yellow, yellow-green, and green as the color scheme. I guess a little bit of yellow-orange as well. So a 4-step analogous color scheme. Analogous colors have to be right next to each other. And you could simplify it by saying it's warm colors or cool colors. I know sometimes those concepts are talked about in elementary school. You get the warms or the cools. Well, Hannah kind of went between the cools and the warms because she went from green into the yellows, but that's okay because they're next to each other. They transition. They're right on the borders. So I have a lot of really fun examples. Here's a cool and here's a warm. Here's a cool. And here's another one where it goes between cools and warms. Aren't those great color schemes? I just love those. But what you absolutely still see is line variety that you can still just do with your pens. Look at these little tiny dots. This section is stippled. Those little dots, that's called stippling. So coming up with interesting ways to shade when you only have black or white, that's a big deal. Wow, I think I've given you a lot to think about. Zentangles, they're really fun. You can do them anywhere, and be gentle with yourself. Your first Zentangle, maybe it's your favorite one you ever make, or maybe it's the first out of 50 that you make and you're gonna cover your wall with Zentangles. Maybe you're gonna come to me in high school someday and show me your entire sketchbook filled with Zentangles. That would be pretty awesome. I would love that. So I hope you have a great journey making your Zentangles. It only takes a few supplies. really just a few. And with the color, you could even add marker. You could use markers, you could use colored pencils. You don't have to use watercolor because the great thing is these are permanent. So you could put Crayola markers right over the top of this and they wouldn't move. They wouldn't bleed, they wouldn't smudge. It'd be really great. So whether you leave it as a black and white or you go into the world of color, I hope you relax, enjoy, build up your patience as an artist because artists have lots of patience. It's not always about your skill, it's about your ability to slow down and be patient. Thank you so much for watching. I cannot wait to see you at Northfield High School. Take care of yourselves.